Every year, the U.S. Navy records incidents that defy explanation: equipment malfunctions, lost transmissions, and, in the rarest of cases, personnel who vanish without a trace. But none have left investigators as unsettled as the disappearance of Lieutenant Commander Evan Marshall in the summer of 2002. A decorated naval officer with an impeccable record, Evan was stationed aboard the USS Raven's Crest, a coastal gunboat patrolling the waters off North Carolina. One quiet night, in calm weather and clear skies, he simply disappeared. No distress signal. No struggle. No trace. Only a cap with his initials would resurface 4 years later, drifting hundreds of miles away in the Atlantic Ocean. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications, because here we uncover the stories the world forgot, the ones buried beneath waves, time, and silence. This is the haunting disappearance of a U.S. naval officer who vanished from his ship, and the strange discoveries that would follow. Lieutenant Commander Evan Marshall was the kind of man the Navy admired and the kind of leader his crew trusted without question. At 36, he'd already served in 2 overseas missions, earned multiple commendations, and was known for his calm command during high-pressure situations. Those who served under him often described him as steady, disciplined, and quietly driven, a man devoted to both the sea and his sense of duty. Stationed at the Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia, Evan's life seemed perfectly aligned with everything he'd ever wanted. He was recently promoted, engaged to a marine biologist named Dr. Allison Kane, and had plans to take leave after one final short deployment aboard the USS Raven's Crest, a patrol gunboat operating along the southeastern coast. But those close to him would later recall small things, subtle shifts that didn't fit the officer they knew. Evan had begun keeping a small notebook, jotting down fragments of thoughts he refused to explain. Some nights, his cabin light stayed on until dawn. Other times, crew members noticed him standing on deck alone, staring at the ocean for long periods as if listening for something only he could hear. Still, there was no reason to worry, or so everyone thought. Evan was the kind of man who carried the weight of the world quietly. Whatever haunted him, he never let it show in his command. When Raven's Crest departed Norfolk on June 14, 2002, no one could have predicted that it would be the last time anyone saw him alive. 4 days into the patrol, somewhere along the waters east of Cape Lookout, everything changed. The night of June 18, 2002, began like any other. The Raven's Crest was maintaining routine patrol about 50 nautical miles off the coast of Cape Lookout, North Carolina. Weather reports noted clear skies, calm seas, and low wind, conditions sailors often called a perfect night for the ocean. According to the ship's log, Lieutenant Commander Evan Marshall made his final radio entry at 23:47 hours, confirming a systems check and navigation update. He then dismissed his night crew, saying he'd remain on deck a little longer to monitor drift. It wasn't unusual. Evan often took personal responsibility for late-night watches. But at 0:36, a sailor named Petty Officer Carter returned to the deck and found the space empty. Evan's cap was still hanging from a hook beside the bridge door. His coffee mug sat half full near the radar station. No sign of disturbance, no splash heard, no alarms triggered. The security cameras facing the starboard side had gone offline 30 minutes prior due to a technical fault, one that would later become a major point of speculation. The crew immediately initiated an overboard search protocol, circling for hours, firing flares into the dark sea, and calling out through the ship's loudspeakers. There was nothing. Not even a ripple. At 2:10 a.m., the Raven's Crest notified Naval Command, and within minutes, nearby vessels and aircraft were rerouted for an official search and rescue operation. The operation expanded over the next 3 days, covering more than 1,200 square miles of ocean. Divers, sonar scans, and thermal imaging yielded nothing. When investigators boarded the vessel afterward, they found no sign of foul play, no footprints, no broken railings, no missing equipment. Only one unsettling detail stood out. Evan's personal logbook, the one he guarded carefully, was gone. As the investigation deepened, so did the mystery. Some crew members began to recall the strange things Evan had said in the days before his disappearance. Cryptic remarks about hearing things beneath the waves, and a growing sense that something out there was watching us. But when investigators pressed them for details, each account differed slightly, as if memory itself was being distorted by the sea. The disappearance of Lieutenant Commander Evan Marshall quickly became one of the most puzzling incidents the Navy had faced in years. Within 48 hours, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, opened a formal inquiry. To them, a decorated officer vanishing from a secure vessel without a single witness or sign of struggle was almost impossible to rationalize. The official interviews started immediately. Every member of the Raven's Crest crew was questioned, some multiple times. Their answers painted the same sterile picture: calm weather, no argument, no distress calls. But beneath the consistency lay an unspoken unease. Several sailors admitted they had felt something odd that night, a sort of static tension in the air, like a distant hum or low-frequency vibration that came and went without source. Investigators combed through every piece of the ship's digital record. The missing 30 minutes of security footage became their central focus. Technicians confirmed that the outage had not been caused by power loss but by a manual override. Someone had turned the cameras off. Yet there was no evidence anyone had left the bridge to do it. Evan's personal belongings were gathered and catalogued. His duffel bag contained his uniforms, a photograph of Allison, and a few letters he never mailed. But the logbook, the one he was seen writing in nightly, was still missing. When NCIS agents asked Allison about it, she said Evan had been filling it with dreams. He'd recently told her that he'd been having the same one every night, standing on deck, staring at calm water that suddenly turned black, hearing whispers beneath the surface, then waking up gasping for air. The Navy issued an official report, presumed lost at sea during routine operations. The media briefly covered the story, framing it as a tragic maritime accident. But to those who knew Evan, the explanation felt hollow. He wasn't careless. And he wasn't reckless. Over the following months, anonymous tips trickled in, claims of distress signals, mysterious transmissions, and sightings of a lone man floating in the Atlantic. Each lead was investigated, each one false. By early 2003, the case was quietly closed. Files were sealed, and the Raven's Crest resumed service with a new commanding officer. Yet among the crew, whispers persisted. Some said they could still hear footsteps pacing the deck at night when no one was there. Others swore that, at times, they heard faint knocking sounds echoing from the hull, as if someone was trying to get back in. 4 years passed. The disappearance of Lieutenant Commander Evan Marshall had faded from the headlines and become a closed chapter in naval records, another unexplained loss at sea. His fiancée, Dr. Allison Kane, eventually transferred to a research facility in Maine, hoping to move on. But something about that final night never left her. She often said she could still feel the ocean owing her an answer. Then, in August of 2006, an unusual call came to the Coast Guard station in Charleston, South Carolina. A local fisherman had found a navy blue officer's hat tangled in his nets about 50 miles offshore. He nearly threw it back into the water until he noticed the name stitched inside the brim: Lieutenant Commander Evan R. Marshall. The hat was in remarkable condition, considering it had been in the ocean for years. The salt had faded the lettering, and the fabric was roughened by time, but it was unmistakably his. When the Coast Guard logged the item and forwarded it to Naval Command, investigators couldn't ignore it. The ocean current analysis showed something chilling. The hat had drifted against the natural current flow. In other words, it hadn't simply floated aimlessly for years. It seemed to have come from somewhere else. The Navy reopened the case briefly to verify authenticity. DNA samples from Evan's old belongings confirmed it was indeed his cap. But how it resurfaced nearly 400 miles south of where he vanished defied every pattern of drift and tide they could model. For Allison, the discovery was both devastating and validating. It reignited her questions and reopened the ache of a story she had never been allowed to finish. She believed it was a sign, something urging her to look deeper, to search again where others had stopped. Soon after, she began contacting retired members of the Raven's Crest crew, trying to piece together what had truly happened that night. What she learned next would change everything she thought she knew about Evan, and about what really lurked beneath those calm Atlantic waters. When Dr. Allison Kane began retracing the final months of Evan's life, she had one goal: to understand what had been haunting him before he vanished. She contacted several of his former shipmates, but most were reluctant to talk. Some had transferred to other bases, others left the Navy altogether. Yet those who agreed to speak all said nearly the same thing: Evan had changed during his last deployment. Through persistence, Allison managed to reach Petty Officer Carter, the same sailor who'd found Evan missing that night. After years of silence, Carter finally confessed that there was something investigators never recovered: the logbook Evan always carried. Carter claimed it wasn't lost at sea. Instead, Evan had hidden it. Carter revealed that 2 days before the disappearance, Evan had called him into his quarters late at night. The commander looked pale, exhausted. He'd asked Carter to keep something safe, an old waterproof pouch containing several handwritten pages, and to destroy them if anything happened to him. But Carter hadn't followed that order. Out of fear or guilt, he'd sealed the pages inside a tin container and buried it near the docks at Norfolk after the investigation ended. Allison convinced him to retrieve it. When they opened the container, the papers inside were worn but legible. What she read shook her. Evan's writings described recurring dreams that had begun weeks before his last patrol. In them, he stood on a dark sea that whispered his name. He wrote about hearing strange frequencies through the sonar system, low, rhythmic pulses that seemed too structured to be random. He mentioned seeing lights beneath the surface that didn't match any known vessel or marine signal. In one entry dated June 17, 2002, a single line stood out: "If the ocean calls again tonight, I won't resist." That was the night before he vanished. The final page ended abruptly with a half-written sentence: "It's not the sea that takes you, it's what waits beneath it." Allison sat in silence, her hands trembling as she held the papers. There was no rational explanation, yet everything about Evan's disappearance suddenly felt more deliberate, almost like he had gone willingly, answering a call no one else could hear. Armed with Evan's journal pages, Dr. Allison Kane began cross-referencing his descriptions with Navy sonar records from June 2002. Most of the files were classified, but through colleagues in oceanography, she gained limited access to archived sonar patterns recorded off the North Carolina coast that same week. What she found sent chills down her spine. At 23:52 hours on the night of Evan's disappearance, the Raven's Crest sonar detected a low-frequency anomaly, a pulse that repeated every 37 seconds. The pattern was consistent for 12 minutes before abruptly stopping. Officially, the Navy logged it as equipment interference. But the frequency, when converted into audible sound, resembled something disturbingly intentional, almost like a rhythmic chant beneath the ocean's surface. Allison brought the data to an acoustic analyst at Duke University, who confirmed that the signal didn't match any marine life, submersible, or known geological source. It was mechanical, but irregular, like it was trying to communicate. When she mapped the origin point of the signal, it aligned eerily close to the Raven's Crest's last known coordinates. In other words, the noise had come from directly beneath the ship at the precise time Evan vanished. The more she learned, the more she began to feel the weight of something far beyond explanation. For years, rumors had circulated within naval circles, stories of deep anomalies, uncharted zones where sonar behaved unpredictably and where sailors claimed to hear voices under the water. Most dismissed them as myth. But Evan's notes, the sonar records, and the resurfaced hat all pointed to one terrifying possibility: that he hadn't fallen overboard or fled. He had gone to something that had called him by name. Allison decided to visit the exact coordinates where he disappeared. She joined a research expedition in the summer of 2007 aboard a civilian vessel. As they lowered the sonar equipment into the deep, she half expected silence. Instead, at nearly the same depth recorded in 2002, the sensors picked up a faint echo, an identical pulse, still repeating, still there. When the analysts slowed down the recording, the pattern formed a distorted frequency resembling a human voice. 3 short bursts, then one long. To Allison, it almost sounded like the sea whispering a name, Evan. When the research team returned to port, the sonar data caused quiet waves of concern among oceanographic circles. Most dismissed it as coincidence, a quirk of deep-sea acoustics. But Dr. Allison Kane wasn't convinced. For her, the repeating pulse wasn't noise. It was a message that hadn't stopped since the night Evan vanished. She petitioned the Navy for permission to conduct one final deep-sea investigation in the same region. After months of paperwork and silence, she finally received clearance. The expedition set sail in late September 2007. 4 days, they scanned the seabed, mapping the contours beneath the coordinates logged in 2002. The terrain was uneven, craters, trenches, and ridges carved by centuries of underwater current. Then, on the 5th night, their equipment captured an anomaly. At roughly 2,700 feet below the surface, the sonar revealed an object partially buried in silt. It was metallic, roughly 30 feet long, and cylindrical. At first, they thought it was wreckage, possibly part of an old submarine. But when divers sent down a remotely operated vehicle, the live video feed revealed something that froze everyone in the control room. The object wasn't wreckage. It was intact, smooth, seamless metal, with no markings, rivets, or corrosion. Embedded within the side was a single circular opening, barely visible through the haze of the camera. And just outside that opening, caught in a nest of coral, was something unmistakable, a fragment of navy blue fabric. When the robotic arm retrieved it, Allison recognized the material instantly. It was part of Evan's missing uniform. Tests later confirmed the fibers matched his service jacket. But what disturbed investigators most was the condition. It showed no signs of 4 years of ocean decay. It looked as though it had been submerged only days before. The Navy immediately sealed the footage, citing national security. The research vessel's crew was instructed to surrender all recordings, and the official report was classified within 24 hours. Allison never spoke publicly about what she saw. But close friends said she changed afterward, quieter, withdrawn, often staring at the horizon for long periods, as Evan once did. 2 years later, she sent one final letter to a colleague at Duke University. It contained a copy of the sonar recording and a handwritten note that read, "The sound is still repeating. It hasn't stopped since 2002. Whatever called him, it's still calling." She disappeared a month later during a solo research trip off the coast of Maine. Her vessel was found adrift, engines still running, with no one aboard. The only thing recovered was her recorder. The final minute of audio contained a faint rhythmic sound, 3 short bursts, one long, echoing through the static. The disappearance of Lieutenant Commander Evan Marshall remains one of the Navy's most unsettling unsolved cases. No evidence of foul play. No proof of accident. Just a man who seemed to vanish into calm waters on a clear summer night. Officially, the U.S. Navy maintains that Marshall was lost at sea, presumed drowned during active duty. But the resurfacing of his hat, the hidden pages, and the signal that never stopped repeating left behind a trail of questions too heavy for logic to answer. To this day, oceanic monitoring stations off the Carolina coast occasionally detect faint pulses matching those first recorded in 2002. Most analysts dismiss them as background interference. Yet others quietly admit the pattern feels intentional, like a heartbeat beneath the waves. Whether Evan Marshall fell victim to the sea, or something far older and deeper, no one can say. What's certain is that the ocean keeps its secrets well, and sometimes it gives just enough back to remind us that it remembers.